Does any member wish to change your vote? On this vote, the yeas are 214 and the nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Moore of Utah moves to reconsider the vote on adoption of House Resolution 863.
The question is on the motion to reconsider. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and the nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 7217, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 7217, a bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the attacks in Israel for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
1 minute.
Frustration, but I got to go to an event, guys. I'm really sorry. I'll catch you later. It's frustration. You'll see it again, though.
It'll come up on the floor soon.
Yeah.
Frustration is going to come up again on the bill, sir, or something like that. He said yes. Will the bill come up again? He said yes.
Hey, you're coming outside, right? Yep. Not yet. Martin just walked by us, didn't stop. So we're waiting. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I'll see you later.
See you later.
This is great.
Hey, it's Manu coming out here, not Mel. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Check. All right. They want to make sure they want both.
Depends.
Just depends. They'll walk in. It's live.
Right there? Where are you from? I can stay warm. Where are you from? Norway. You're from Norway and you're just like that? We're not doing blood sack. Better cut off all of this. Nobody in your family never says just like this. I only wear the jacket because I can have to. Well, I'm out. I'm retired. Yeah. Yeah. Stanford.
How are you? Good to see you.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's true.
Texas.
Where your car is? The big car? The pickup. Oh, it's a great. Is there room for me, or am I to sit on your lap?
No, there's plenty.
Okay.
Great pickup truck, unless it took another car.
All right. Oh, look. I don't like it.
I just like.
When you're the speaker, yeah, when you're the speaker, you go for some victories, not big ones. Good one.
Congressman Jimenez, can we get your reaction to the vote? What do you think the next step is?
Well, the next step is we will reconsider. I think when the majority leader gets back, that'll make it 216 to 215, and then if everybody holds pat, then I think that the Secretary of Mayorkas will be impeached.
Are you concerned that the only bipartisan part of the vote was against?
No, I know those three gentlemen. They're very principled. They have their reasons. They think it's on constitutional grounds. They certainly, I don't believe that he's done a good job. But no, I have no problem with him, and no, it doesn't concern me at all. It is a full body. So I think at the end, when our majority leader comes back, everybody holds their vote. It will be 216 to 15, and then he will be impeached.
What was the atmosphere on the floor? It seemed really rowdy from the feed. Is there a lot of yelling? How would you describe it?
No, I think everybody was just looking, and it was a horse race, right? Right to the end, and 215 to 215, and so no, it wasn't rowdy or anything. People, this is serious business, and so we don't take any pride or joy in any of this. I certainly don't. I voted my conscience, and so did everybody else in there, and so this isn't over yet. We'll wait till the majority leader comes.
Do you think leadership was caught off guard by these members?
I think what happened was that the Democrats held an individual in reserve, right? And so when they initially counted, they thought they had the votes. Maybe leadership thought they had the votes, and then the Democrats came up with one final person and kind of evened it out. So in that sense, yeah, they may have been caught a little bit off guard, and got to take your hat off to the Democratic leadership for doing that. But I think in the end, it's going to be close. But I think in the end, he'll be impeached.
Should they have brought it to the floor if they didn't know the outcome beforehand?
Well, I think they thought they had the outcome. They knew the outcome, and then they thought that maybe one of the Democrats was not there.
Yes.
And it turns out he was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just like a
Yeah, it was a hide and
problem,
it was a hide and seek problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
guys.
you.
Appreciate it.
Didn't get the first part of your interaction.
Oh, you didn't? The mic died.
But he answered the question. How long did it go? The first two. Well, if that might yeah, it must be the cold doctor.
question a lot of them about 42 reactions to bipartisan.
Mr. Liu, you want to come on down to the cameras briefly? What are your thoughts on the vote that just failed right now?
I normally would. I have to wait.
Okay.
Republican leadership didn't get the votes. They knew it'd be close. You know, divided house, razor thin majority here, and they thought they could muscle this through on the slimmest of majorities, but it blew up in their face. In large part because they had miscalculated the absences of the floor. Remember, that there are not the vote is essentially a majority of people who are present and voting. They expected there to be one Democratic absence. Now I asked every showed up to vote.
First of all, what's your reaction to the vote?
We knew it was going to be close going in because our majority is so razor thin. Of course, my colleagues that voted no, I think they'll be hearing from their constituents. But we have a plan in place. There was a motion to recommit. And that means that we can bring the articles of impeachment back to the floor maybe as early as next week. So this is not over yet, and we still can bring back Steve Scalise, and we hope that he's well and he can come back very soon. We look forward to having him come back, and we look forward to him being a solid yes on impeaching Secretary Mayorkas.
It's a failure of leadership.
In 2019, Republicans were really concerned that the vote against Donald Trump for his first impeachment was down party lines, except it was bipartisan against. That's exactly what just happened here. So why is this different?
Well, the reason why this is different is because Democrats have a choice to make. Either they're defending Mayorkas and they're defending the fact that 300 Americans are dying every single day, that over 10 million people have crossed our border, that Americans are the victim of rape, murder, assaults, cartels causing all kinds of problems in our country. Kids are being kicked out of school to house migrants. Americans are being forced to pay for it. Democrats are either owning those as their policies and defending Secretary Mayorkas, saying that he's doing nothing wrong, or we can actually vote to impeach Mayorkas. I'm going to argue that we can get this done on the House floor, and I look forward to seeing it happen.
This is a failure on leadership's part.
There hasn't been a failure yet. We're going to bring it back.
It seems like Democrats hid one of these votes that they had, so it wasn't something that people would see. Is that something that Republican leadership
I'm glad you asked that because well, we can basically look at this as a game, unfortunately, and their strategy. And they hid one of their members waiting to the last minute, watching to see our votes, trying to throw us off on the numbers that we had versus the numbers they had. So yeah, that was a strategy at play tonight.
So do you essentially see this as an attendance issue, and you're confident that when Scalise is healthy to come back to the Capitol, you'll bring this back and you will be able to impeach Mayorkas?
It's basically two issues. It's several of our members need to think about things over the weekend. And then secondly, we look forward to having Steve Scalise back.
And do you think that there's a chance that you can flip some of those GOP no votes? I mean, they went on a limb tanking this thing today. You think that they're going to change it?
I would really love to see them go home and talk to their voters, the people that hired them to come here. I know that several of them have very strong Republican districts. And I also look forward to seeing Steve Scalise come back and then hopefully getting this done on the House floor next week.
Congressman, what do you say though to those three Republicans? There are four, but there are three who are no votes. How do you think the voters in their districts will respond to their no votes?
Well, I'm sure they'll hear from their constituents. I'm sure they're probably hearing from them already. But I think they should listen to them. And, that's what we do. We represent our districts. And so I hope those that voted no listen to their constituents and listen to their voters. And again, I look forward to having Steve Scalise back. Of course, been praying for him this whole time to beat cancer.
Was this a miscalculation though for the speaker to put this down on the floor tonight?
No, I don't think it's a miscalculation. You want to know why? I love transparency. And I'm happy that the American people got to see the vote record tonight. I think it's a good thing for our country. And I think that's the right thing because then the American people can get involved. They can make phone calls, they can show up, and they can express their wishes, what they want to see their representatives do. So no, I don't think it's a failure at all.
We saw you having a pretty intense conversation with Gallagher on the House floor when the vote was open. What were you saying to him, and what was he responding?
I was explaining to him that we have 6 pages in our articles of impeachment citing where Secretary Mayorkas has broken federal immigration law, and arguing my points to him that it's the right thing to do to vote to impeach.
This was looked at as like almost a layoff.
What was his response?
How did he respond?
To that?
He doesn't think that it's very clear in his mind. Again, I think he's got a full weekend to hear from his constituents. Hopefully it becomes a lot more clear.
This was looked at as almost like a layup impeachment for Republicans. The Joe Biden one was going to obviously be more difficult. Do you think this spells some trouble going forward for any kind of Biden impeachment?
This should be a layup impeachment vote. If you were to ask the American people, I tell you what, if we could have the American people have their own voter cards and go in there to vote, they would have easily voted to impeach Mayorkas and they would easily vote to impeach Biden. And that's why Joe Biden is losing poll after poll every single week, nationally and statewide, states all over the country. If you ask the American people, a lot of things are a lot easier, but there's it seems to be more complicated.
But after this vote, are you worried about the Biden impeachment vote? This one failed.
I'm focused on this one right now, and we still have more depositions to do. We still have the brother of the president, James Biden, coming in, and Hunter Biden, after he ran away, decided to come back. Okay, guys, it's cold.
Have you made any preparations with the impeachment managers for a potential trial if it works the second time?
We haven't had those meetings yet. We've been working on whipping the votes and getting this done on the House floor.
Are you going to pressure those 3 Republicans to flip?
I don't think I have to.
Why is that?
I think the American people are going to make their voices heard.
Now, if you bring this back up, how important is it to get it right the second time? And, what's at stake for having a second impeachment vote potentially fail?
I think there'll be a good plan in place to make sure it doesn't fail.
Congresswoman, are you concerned about reprisals from AIPAC for voting down this funding measure?
No, because if you care about Israel, if you really care about Israel, you want Israel to be able to conduct their war the way they want to. And if the money becomes a hook, then the State Department and the Biden administration will want to get involved and start telling Israel what to do with their war, when to do it, and how to do it. I don't think that's the right thing for Israel. I think the people in Israel want to have full control over what they're doing. And I think anybody that fully supports Israel wants them to have full control.
Are you frustrated with the 3 GOP no votes?
I would love to send them vote yes.
Are you frustrated with how they ended up?
I'll answer that after we do the second vote.
Well,
Yeah. Okay, guys.
Following up on the
heading out of
Israel
here.
question, the
Yeah,
ambassador to
thank
Israel
you.
said this was time sensitive to him a few weeks ago he was up here. The ambassador to Israel said this was time sensitive to him. Time sensitive a few weeks ago.
bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, in violation of his oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, has willfully and systemically refused to comply with federal immigration laws, and that throughout his tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas has repeatedly violated laws enacted by Congress regarding immigration and border security. In large part because of his unlawful conduct, millions of aliens have illegally entered the United States on an annual basis, with many unlawfully remaining in the United States. Its refusal to obey the law is not only an offense against the separation of powers in the Constitution of the United States, it also threatens our national security and has had a dire impact on communities across the country. Despite clear evidence that his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law has significantly contributed to unprecedented levels of illegal entrance, the increased control of the southwest border by drug cartels, and the imposition of enormous costs on states and localities affected by the influx of aliens, Alejandro Mayorkas has continued in his refusal to comply with the law and thereby acted to the grave detriment of the interests of the United States. Alejandro Mayorkas engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. 1. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B2A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, requiring that all applicants for admission who are not clearly and beyond a doubt entitled to be admitted shall be detained for a removal proceeding. Instead of complying with his requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens are unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearances before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removal in the case of alien ordered removed. 2. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B1B II of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined to have a credible fear of prosecution shall be detained for further consideration of the application for asylum. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens are unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearances before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 3. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention set forth in Section 235B1B III-4 of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined not to have a credible fear of persecution shall be detained until removed. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas has implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens are unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearances before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removed in the case of aliens ordered removed. 4. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 236C of such act, requiring that a criminal alien who is inadmissible or deportable on certain criminal and terrorism-related grounds shall be taken into custody when the alien is released from law enforcement custody. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas issued guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, which instructs Department of Homeland Security, here and thereafter referred to as DHS, officials that the fact an individual is a removable non-citizen shall not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, and that DHS personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction alone, even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory arrest and detention pursuant to Section 236C of such act, to take them into custody. In Texas versus United States, 40 F 4th 205, 2022, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded that these guidelines had every indication of being a general policy that is so extreme as to amount to an abdication of statutory responsibilities, that its replacement of Congress's statutory mandates with concerns of equity and race is extra-legal and plainly outside the bounds of the power conferred by the INA. 5. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 241A2 of such act, requiring that an alien ordered removed shall be detained during the removal period. Instead of complying with this mandate, Alejandro Mayorkas issued guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, which instructs DHS officials that the fact an individual is a removable non-citizen shall not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, and that DHS personnel shall not rely on the fact of conviction alone, even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory detention and removal pursuant to Section 241A of such act. 6. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully exceeded his parole authority set forth in Section 212D5A of such act that permits parole to be granted only on a case-by-case basis, temporarily and for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, in that A. Alejandro and Mayorkas paroled aliens en masse in order to release them from mandatory detention, despite the fact that, as the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded in Texas versus Biden, 20 F. 4th 928, 2021, paroling every alien, DHS, cannot detain in the opposite of the case-by-case basis determines required by law, and DHS's pretended power to parole aliens while ignoring the limitations Congress imposed on the parole power is not non-enforcement. It's misenforcement, suspension of the INA, or both. B. Alejandro and Mayorkas created, reopened, or expanded a series of categorical parole programs never authorized by Congress for foreign nationals outside of the United States, including for certain Central American minors, Ukrainians, Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Colombians, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, Hondurans, which enabled hundreds of thousands of inadmissible aliens to enter the United States in violation of the laws enacted by Congress. 7. Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully exceeded his release authority set forth in Section 236A of such act that permits, in certain circumstances, the release of aliens arrested on an administrative warrant, and that Alejandro and Mayorkas released aliens arrested without a warrant, despite their being subject to a separate applicable mandatory detention requirement set forth in Section 235B2 of such act. Alejandro and Mayorkas released such aliens by retroactively issuing administrative warrants in an attempt to circumvent Section 235B2 of such act. In Florida versus United States, number 3:21 CV 1066 TKW ZCB, ND, Florida, March 8, 2023, the United States District Court of the Northern District of Florida noted that this sleight of hand using an arrest warrant as a de facto release warrant is administrative sophistry at its worst. In addition, the court concluded that what makes DHS's application of 236A in this matter unlawful is that 235B2, not 236A, governs the detention of applicants for admission whom DHS places in removal proceedings after inspection. Alejandro and Mayorkas's willful and systemic refusal to comply with the laws has had calamitous consequences for the nation and the people of the United States, including: 1, during fiscal years 2017 through 2020, an average of about 590,000 aliens each fiscal year were encountered as inadmissible aliens at ports of entry on the southwest border or apprehended between ports of entry. Therefore, during Alejandro and Mayorkas's tenure in office, that number skyrocketed to over 1,400,000 in fiscal year 2021, over 2,300,000 in fiscal year 2022, and over 2,400,000 in fiscal year 2023. Similarly, during fiscal year 2017 through 2020, an average of 130,000 persons who were not turned back were apprehended after making an illegal entry were observed along the border each fiscal year. During Alejandro and Mayorkas's tenure in office, that number more than trebled to 400,000 in fiscal year 2021, 600,000 in fiscal year 2022, and 750,000 in fiscal year 2023. 2, American communities, both along the southwest border and across the United States, have been devastated by the dramatic growth in illegal entries, the number of aliens unlawfully present, and substantial rise in the number of aliens unlawfully granted parole, creating a fiscal and humanitarian crisis and dramatically degrading the quality of life of the residents of those communities. For instance, since 2022, more than 150,000 migrants have gone through New York City's shelter intake system. Indeed, the mayor of New York City has said that we are past our breaking point and that this issue will destroy New York City. In fiscal year 2023, New York City spent $1,450,000,000 addressing Alejandro and Mayorkas's migrant crisis, and city officials fear it will spend another $12 billion over the following 3 fiscal years, causing painful budget cuts in important city services. 3, Alejandro Mayorkas' unlawful mass release of apprehended aliens and unlawful mass grant of categorical parole to aliens have enticed an increasing number of aliens to make the dangerous journey to our southwest border. Consequently, according to the United Nations International Organization for Migration, the number of migrants intending to illegally cross our border who have perished along the way, either en route to the United States or at the border, almost doubled during the tenure of Alejandro Mayorkas as Secretary of Homeland Security, from an average of about 700 a year during the fiscal years 2017 through 2020 to an average of about 1,300 a year during fiscal years 2021 through 2023. 4, alien smuggling organizations have gained tremendous wealth during Alejandro Mayorkas' tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, with their estimated revenues rising from about $500 billion in 2018 to approximately $13 billion in 2022. 5, during Alejandro Mayorkas' tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, the immigration court backlog has more than doubled from about 1,300,000 cases to over 3 million cases. The exploding backlog is destroying the court's ability to administer justice and provide appropriate relief in a time frame that does not run into years or even decades. As Alejandro Mayorkas acknowledged, those who have a valid claim to asylum often wait years for a decision. Likewise, non-citizens who will ultimately be found ineligible for asylum or other protection, which occurs in the majority of cases, often have spent many years in the United States prior to being ordered removed. He noted that of aliens placed in expedited removal proceedings and found to have a credible fear of persecution, and thus referred to immigration judges for removal proceedings, significantly fewer than 20% were ultimately granted asylum, and only 28% of cases decided on their merits are grants of relief. Alejandro Mayorkas also admitted that the fact that migrants can wait in the United States for years before being issued a final order denying relief, and that many such individuals are never actually removed, likely incentivizes migrants to make the journey north. 6, during Alejandro Mayorkas' tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, approximately 450,000 unaccompanied alien children have been encountered at the southwest border, and the vast majority have been released into the United States. As a result, there has been a dramatic upsurge in migrant children being employed in dangerous and exploitive jobs in the United States. 7, Alejandro Mayorkas' failure to enforce the law, drawing millions of illegal aliens to the southwest border, has led to the reassignment of U.S. Border Patrol agents from protecting the border from illicit drug trafficking to processing illegal aliens for release. As a result, during Alejandro Mayorkas' tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, the flow of fentanyl across the border and other dangerous drugs, both at and between ports of entry, has increased dramatically. U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized approximately 4,800 pounds of fentanyl in fiscal year 2020, approximately 11,200 pounds in fiscal year 2021, approximately 14,700 pounds in fiscal year 2022, and approximately 27,000 pounds in fiscal year 2023. Over 70,000 Americans died from fentanyl poisoning in 2022, and fentanyl is now the #1 killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. 8, Alejandro Mayorkas has degraded public safety by leaving wide swaths of the border effectively unpatrolled as U.S. Border Patrol agents are diverted from guarding the border to processing unlawful release, the heightening waves of apprehended aliens, many who now seek out agents for the purpose of surrendering with the now reasonable expectation of being released and granted work authorization. And federal air marshals are diverted from protecting the flying public to assist in such processing. 9, during Alejandro Mayorkas' tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, the U.S. Border Patrol has encountered an increasing number of aliens on the terrorist watch list. In fiscal year 2017 through 2020 combined, 11 non-citizens on the terrorist watch list were caught attempting to cross the southwest border between ports of entry. That number increased to 15 in fiscal year 2021, 98 in fiscal year 2022, 169 in fiscal year 2023, and 49 so far in fiscal year 2024. Additionally, in United States versus Texas 599 U.S. 670, 2023, the United States Supreme Court heard a case involving Alejandro Mayorkas' refusal to comply with certain federal immigration laws that are at issue in this impeachment. The Supreme Court held that states have no standing to seek judicial relief to compel Alejandro Mayorkas to comply with certain legal requirements contained in the Immigration and Nationality Act. However, the Supreme Court held that even though the federal courts lack Article 3 jurisdiction over this suit, other forums remain open for examining the executive branch's enforcement policies. For example, Congress possesses an array of tools to analyze and influence those policies, and those are political checks for the political process. One such critical tool for Congress to influence the executive branch to comply with the immigration laws of the United States is impeachment. The dissenting justice noted, the court holds Texas lacks standing to challenge a federal policy that inflicts substantial harm on the state and its residents by releasing illegal aliens with criminal convictions for serious crimes. In order to reach this conclusion, the court holds that the only limit on the power of a president to disobey a law, like the important provisions at issue, is Congress's power to employ the weapons of interbranch warfare. As the dissenting justice explained, Congress may wield what the Solicitor General described as political tools, which presumably means such things as impeachment and removal. Indeed, during oral argument, the justice who authored the majority opinion stated that the Solicitor General, I think your position is, instead of judicial review, Congress has to resort to shutting down the government or impeachment or dramatic steps. Here, in light of the inability of injured parties to seek judicial relief to remedy the refusal of Alejandro Mayorkas to comply with federal immigration laws, impeachment is Congress's only viable option. In all of this, Alejandro Mayorkas willfully and systemically refused to comply with the immigration laws, failed to control the border to the detriment of national security, compromised public safety, and violated the rule of law and separation of powers in the Constitution to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Alejandro Mayorkas, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the national and border security, the safety of the United States people, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with his duties and the rule of law. Alejandro Mayorkas thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Article 2, breach of public trust. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that civil officers of the United States, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall be removed from office or impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, in violation of his oath to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, has breached the public trust, and that Alejandro Mayorkas has knowingly made false statements and knowingly obstructed lawful oversight of the Department of Homeland Security, herein thereafter referred to as DHS, principally to obfuscate the results of willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. Alejandro Mayorkas engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. 1. Alejandro Mayorkas knowingly made false statements to Congress that the border is secure, that the border is no less secure than it was previously, that the border is closed, and that DHS has operational control of the border, as that term is defined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006. 2. Alejandro Mayorkas knowingly made false statements to Congress regarding the scope and adequacy of the vetting of the thousands of Afghans who were airlifted into the United States and then granted parole following the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan after President Biden's precipitous withdrawal of United States forces. 3. Alejandro Mayorkas knowingly made false statements that the apprehended aliens with no legal basis to remain in the United States were being quickly removed. 4. Alejandro N. Mayorkas knowingly make false statements supporting the false narrative that U.S. Border Patrol agents maliciously whipped illegal aliens. 5. Alejandro N. Mayorkas failed to comply with multiple subpoenas issued by congressional committees. 6. Alejandro N. Mayorkas delayed or denied access of DHS Office of Inspector General, hereinafter referred to as OIG, to DHS records and information hampering OIG's ability to effectively perform its vital investigations, audits, inspections, and other reviews of agency programs and operations to satisfy the OIG's obligations under Section 402B of Title V, United States Code, in part to Congress. Additionally, in his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has breached the public trust by his willful refusal to fulfill his statutory duty to control and guard the boundaries and borders of the United States against the illegal entry of aliens, as set forth in Section 103A5 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Alejandro N. Mayorkas inherited what his first chief of the U.S. Border Patrol called arguably the most effective border security in our nation's history. Alejandro N. Mayorkas, however, proceeded to abandon effective border security initiatives without engaging in adequate alternative efforts that would enable DHS to maintain control of the border and guard against illegal entry. And despite clear evidence of the devastating consequences of his actions, he failed to take action to fulfill his statutory duty to control the border. According to his first chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, Alejandro N. Mayorkas similarly rejected the multiple options to reduce the illegal entries through the proven programs and consequences provided by civil servants staff at DHS. Despite clear evidence of the devastating consequences of his actions, he failed to take action to fulfill his statutory duty to control the border, and that, among other things: 1. Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated the Migrant Protection Protocols, hereinafter referred to as MPP, in Texas versus Biden 20 F4 928 2021. The United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit explained that the district court pointed to evidence that the termination of MPP has contributed to the current border surge, citing DHS's own previous determinations that MPP had curbed the rate of illegal entries. The district court has also pointed out that the number of enforcement encounters, that is, instances where immigration officials encounter immigrants attempting to cross the southern border without documentation, have skyrocketed since MPP's termination. 2. Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated contracts for border wall construction. 3. Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated asylum cooperative agreements that would have equitably shared the burden of complying with international asylum accords. And all of this, Alejandro N. Mayorkas breached the public trust by knowingly making false statements to Congress and the American people and avoiding lawful oversight in order to obscure the devastating consequences of his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and carry out his statutory duties. He has also breached the public trust by willfully refusing to carry out his statutory duty to control the border and guard against illegal entry, notwithstanding the calamitous consequences of his abdication of that duty. Wherefore, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the national and border security, the safety of the American people, and to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with his duties and the rule of law. Alejandro N. Mayorkas thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States.
Pursuant to House Resolution 9960 amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee of Homeland Security is adopted, the resolution shall be debatable for 2 hours, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee of Homeland Security or their respective designees. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Green, and the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, each will control 1 hour. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have five legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on HRes 863.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to present 2 articles of impeachment against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Article 1 charges him with willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. And Article 2 charges him with the breach of public trust. Since Secretary Mayorkas took office, we've all watched the unprecedented crisis at our borders unfold. We've seen the chaos. Under Secretary Mayorkas' watch, CBP has reported more than 8.5 million encounters at our borders, including more than 7 million apprehensions at the southwest border. Even more terrifying is the approximate 1.8 million known gotaways that Border Patrol agents detect but are unable to apprehend. Millions of those inadmissible aliens who are encountered are eventually released into our communities. This has never happened before in the history of the country, and it doesn't happen by accident. For nearly a year, the House Committee on Homeland Security conducted a thorough, fair, and comprehensive investigation into the causes, costs, and consequences of the border crisis. Our members saw firsthand numerous parts of the southwest border, spent time with law enforcement officers on the front lines, and spoke with real Americans about how the crisis is affecting them. We also conducted a field hearing and roundtable on the border that our Democrat colleagues refused to attend, burying their heads in the sand as if there wasn't a crisis. We published 7 total reports, totaling nearly 400 pages, to which Democrats never had a single substantive response. Instead, their only response was to simply shout MAGA louder and louder. And if that's a meaningful response to the millions of Americans suffering from, as if that's a meaningful response to the millions of Americans suffering from this crisis. We held many hearings at the subcommittee and full committee level, and we heard from a variety of witnesses, including former senior DHS enforcement officials, state attorneys general, and victims who've been impacted by Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis. Democrats consistently claimed these hearings were a waste of time. Tell that to the families of 150,000 Americans who died from fentanyl poisoning in 2021 and 22 alone. Throughout this investigation, our subsequent impeachment proceedings, we found that Secretary Mayorkas' willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and his breach of public trust are responsible for this historic crisis. However, for almost a year, Democrats have turned a blind eye to the victims of the border crisis, while berating us for spending what they believed was too much time investigating Secretary Mayorkas' lawless handling of our sovereign borders. Keep that in mind when you hear them claim now this impeachment is somehow rushed. The truth is this process has been painstakingly thorough. Unlike House Democrats, we take the use of impeachment extremely seriously. While I do not wish to be standing here presenting these articles today, we have exhausted all other options. Our oath to the Constitution now requires us to exercise this solemn duty. Secretary Mayorkas has explicitly refused to comply with the law. He has refused to obey the law. His refusal to obey the law has led to the death of our fellow citizens. And he no longer deserves to keep his job. What's unique here in the history of impeachments is that the Supreme Court, just this summer, denied the effective state's judicial review on many of these issues, but with the understanding that the result of doing so could mean the impeachment of a secretary. In oral argument, Justice Kavanaugh explained how he understood the position of the Biden administration if judicial review was denied, saying, and I quote, "I think your position is instead of judicial review, Congress has to resort to shutting down the government or impeachment or dramatic steps if some administration comes in and says we're not going to enforce laws, or at least not going to enforce the laws to the degree that Congress, by law, has said the laws should be enforced," end quote. In response, the Biden administration Solicitor General agreed, saying, quote, "Well, I think that if those dramatic steps would be warranted, it would be in the face of a dramatic abdication of statutory responsibility by the executive," end quote. Today's articles of impeachment outline exactly that, a dramatic abdication of statutory responsibility by Secretary Mayorkas has occurred. Of the articles, 20 pages, 6 are solely dedicated to the laws Secretary Mayorkas has violated, while 4 more document his lies to Congress and the American people, and the violation of his statutory duty to control and guard our borders. We identify numerous unambiguous provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act he has refused to enforce. Laws requiring him to detain inadmissible aliens and limit his ability to grant people parole. We also highlight how programs he has created, such as various mass parole programs, are void of congressional authority. Secretary Mayorkas is the very type of public official the framers feared, someone who would cast aside the laws passed by a co-equal branch of government and replace those with his own preferences, hurting his fellow Americans in the process. He has directed the release of millions of inadmissible aliens into the country in violation of the INA, which requires them to be detained. He has abused the statute limiting parole to be issued only on a case-by-case and temporary basis for very specific limited reasons, instead overseeing more than 1.5 million paroles. He has created new categorical parole programs in defiance of the statute to further his mass release agenda. And he has directed Immigration and Customs Enforcement personnel not to detain all manner of illegal aliens, including criminal aliens. In his September 2021 enforcement guidance, the Secretary even directed that unlawful presence in the country was no longer sufficient grounds for removal, and that criminal convictions alone were not enough to warrant ICE attention. This is not about policy differences. We certainly object to Secretary Mayorkas' policies, but this goes far deeper. According to the Democrat-led committees that investigated Iran-Contra, quote, government officials must observe the law, even when they disagree with it, end quote. Or when they think that, quote, Congress is to blame for passing laws that run counter to administration policy, end quote. Again, we're here because our oath and our duty compel us to be here. The actions and decisions of Secretary Mayorkas have left us with no other option than to proceed with articles of impeachment. That is why we must remove him from office. The time for accountability is now. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to House Resolution 863 and the Republican sham impeachment of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Madam Speaker, what is happening here today is a travesty. It's an affront to the United States Constitution. It will do nothing to solve challenges at our border, and it's a baseless attack on a dedicated public servant. Republican members of Congress sworn to support and defend the Constitution are rejecting the framers' intent and over 2 centuries of precedent in favor of a politically motivated sham impeachment. Republicans have failed to make a constitutional viable case against impeachment. Neither of the impeachment charges in H.Res. 863 are a high crime and misdemeanor under Article 2 of the Constitution. Impeachment over mere policy disputes was deliberately rejected by the framers, and those disputes are best settled in our court system. In fact, the policy disputes identified in the articles of impeachment have already been addressed by the courts. The courts have either decided in the Biden administration's favor, or the disputes are still working their way through the system. Republicans are trying to relitigate court decisions through a sham impeachment, but the Constitution doesn't allow that. Constitutional experts testified before the Committee on Homeland Security that for a breach of public trust to rise to a high crime and misdemeanor, it would require conduct intended to serve an official's own benefit or the benefit of a foreign power. Secretary Mayorkas has done nothing of the sort. Republicans have misrepresented the law and Secretary Mayorkas' record to justify this sham impeachment. Secretary Mayorkas has served our country honorably over 30 years as a prosecutor and in leadership roles at the Department of Homeland Security. He's been a tireless advocate for the more than 260,000 DHS employees working to secure the homeland every day. He's leveraged all the authorities at his disposal while using every resource provided by Congress to secure the border. Under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, DHS removed record levels of migrants from the U.S., detained even more people than Congress had provided funding for, and prevented record levels of fentanyl from entering our communities. If House Republicans were serious about improving conditions along the border, they would provide the department the funding necessary to do so. They have not. At every opportunity, Republicans have refused to provide resources to the Department of Homeland Security. If House Republicans were serious about improving conditions at the border, they would support the bipartisan Senate border bill. They have not. Republicans take their orders from Donald Trump, and he told them to reject the Senate bill. Republicans have been trying to kill the bill before they even knew what was in it. The Republican majority is running a do-nothing Congress. This sham impeachment effort isn't really about border security. It will do nothing to solve the border challenges we face. The truth is, the extreme mega Republicans running the House of Representatives don't want solutions. They want a political issue. House Republicans want to distort the Constitution and the Secretary's record to cover up their inability and unwillingness to work with Democrats to strengthen border security. It's about Republican politics and subversion of the Constitution. Bipartisan constitutional law and impeachment experts agree the Secretary has not committed an impeachable offense. Former Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff agrees, and even some of my Republican colleagues here in the House agree. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, said in a memorandum to House Republican colleagues, and I quote, "Problem is that the impeachment articles fail to identify an impeachable crime," unquote. The gentleman from California is right. I suspect some of his Republican colleagues agree, even if they won't admit it. Secretary Mayorkas has faithfully implemented the administration's border policies consistent with the funding Congress has provided, just like every other Secretary of Homeland Security before him, Democrat or Republican. During consideration in the Homeland Security Committee last week, Republicans improperly shut down the markup and blocked Democrats from offering amendments to the resolution. Republicans couldn't bear to consider amendments to their poorly drafted articles of impeachment. They silenced Democrats who attempted to inject a dose of reality into the chaotic proceedings. Yesterday, before the Rules Committee, Republicans again failed to make their case, relying on partisan rhetoric and obvious misinformation before neither the law nor the facts are on their side. The truth is, Republicans' actions show they don't have faith in their own case against the Secretary. That's why they lack the courage of their convictions to see their markup to an end. This nonsense has to stop, and it should stop here. Republicans need to start doing their work Americans sent them here to do. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to honor their oath to the Constitution, listen to the constitutional experts, listen to your own Republican colleagues who know H-Res 863 is baseless. Drop this sham impeachment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Georgia, Mrs. Green.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of H-Res 863, impeaching Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Alejandro Mayorkas is guilty of aiding and abetting the complete invasion of our country by criminals, gang members, terrorists, murderers, rapists, and over 10 million people from over 160 countries into American communities all across the United States. His willful refusal to secure the border has bankrupted communities, closed down U.S. schools that our children attend, drowned hospitals, and incapacitated law enforcement while empowering criminal cartels and illegal aliens. My Democrat colleagues argue that one cannot be impeached over policy differences. Well, I argue that breaking our laws is more than just policy differences. 300 dead Americans every day from fentanyl poisoning is more than just a policy difference, it's murder. Today in my own office, narcotics law enforcement officers from Georgia told me that 7 out of 10 Oxycontins or Percocets sold on the street are laced with fentanyl, and that comes directly across the border from Mexico. Secretary Mayorkas has violated numerous provisions in the Immigration and Nationality Act, including unlawfully directing DHS to mass parole illegal aliens into the U.S. when federal law specifically prohibits this, and unlawfully implementing catch and release policies when federal law specifically mandates the detention and removal of inadmissible aliens. In fact, detention facilities under Mayorkas have been mostly vacant because of such unlawful policies. The largest detention facility in California, which can house almost 2,000 illegals, is currently housing only 6 illegal aliens. He has violated his oath of office and breached the public trust by willfully refusing to ensure the laws passed by Congress and signed into law by the president are faithfully executed as required by Article 2 of the Constitution. He has allowed over 10 million illegal border crossers to invade our country, approximately 2 million of whom are known gotaways. These are people who have completely evaded U.S. authorities and are roaming the interior of the American communities, assaulting, raping, and murdering Americans. And God help us if we have a terrorist attack on our land. His subversion of the law has resulted in the highest number of illegal alien encounters in a single day, in the highest number of illegal alien encounters in a single month, and the highest number of illegal alien encounters in a single year, surpassing every national record on each account.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I yield the lady an additional 15 seconds.
His willful refusal to enforce the law has resulted in the most egregious national security crisis in the history of our country. Democrats are in a quandary. Either they must own the policies of murder and crime of American citizens, or they can admit Secretary Mayorkas has broken federal laws and vote to impeach Secretary Mayorkas.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Though she sits on the Homeland Security Committee, Representative Margaret Taylor Greene has raised doubts about 9/11 to the false assertion that 9/11 was done by our own government. She said that's all true. She also thinks Jewish space lasers cause wildfires. She fundraises off defunding the FBI. She's a person whose advice Republicans are taking today on this impeachment. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Gentleman is recognized.
Welcome, my colleagues, to another week of Impeachment Unlimited. Having no legislative accomplishments to show for their 14 months in power, Republicans are voting on yet another pointless resolution. Unable to provide any evidence against President Biden, they have now decided to impeach someone else instead. We have serious challenges at the border, no one denies that, but these are not serious people. By this standard put forward by this hapless majority, every single DHS secretary would have been impeached. This is a policy and political dispute, not a high crime or misdemeanor. When an administration official tries to extort a foreign leader into helping them cheat in an election or leads an insurrection against our government, then impeach them. But until then, stop wasting everyone's time. I've known Ali Mayorkas since we were prosecutors together. He is a person of great integrity and devotion to this country. This impeachment is baseless, It is unconstitutional and it should be defeated. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from Tennessee recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Gentleman is
Chairman
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Secretary Mayorkas took an oath to protect our nation from all enemies, foreign and domestic. He has violated that oath and the public trust. Today, I intend to personally uphold the oath of office that I swore to my country. In my 25 years of dealing with the border as a federal prosecutor and the former chairman of this committee, I've never seen it this broken. That's because of one man's actions, his refusal to enforce the law, his rescission of successful policies like Remain in Mexico, his breach of public trust, his dereliction of duty has led to 8 million encounters, 300 on the terror watch list, 2.3 million aliens released into the interior, enough to fill 13 states. 200,000 young Americans have died due to fentanyl poisoning. These numbers are clear. Secretary Mayorkas is the architect of destruction, and the legal justification for his impeachment is strong. In the Supreme Court decision, the United States versus the state of Texas, the court examined a statute that mandated, quote, the government shall take into custody any alien that has committed an aggravated felon. It's not discretionary, it's mandatory. By failing to uphold this law, he has released dangerous and violent criminals into our communities and has put every American life at risk. Supreme Court Justice Story in 1833 said, quote, where a Lord Admiral has neglected to safeguard the seas, that shall be deemed an impeachable offense. That's exactly the case we have here. Secretary Mayorkas, charged with defense of air, land, and sea, has failed to defend our borders. The founders clearly believed impeachable offenses included neglect of duty, violation of public trust, injury to society. When asked before the Supreme Court if impeachment is a proper remedy, President Biden's own Solicitor General said, quote, in the face of a dramatic abdication of statutory responsibility by the executive branch, such steps would be warranted, end of quote. Secretary Mayorkas is guilty of those impeachable offenses. He is destroying the fabric of this nation, and Americans agree. So today I will proudly stand up for our nation by voting to remove him from office, and I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas has invested significantly in stopping dangerous drugs like fentanyl entering the country and launched several efforts targeting smugglers, gangs, and cartels. Under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, with more personnel, technology, infrastructure, and resources on our borders than ever. I now yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you very much. You know, considering this impeachment resolution is the fastest I've seen the House GOP move all session. That's because there's been no collection of evidence, only the manipulation of it. There's been no meaningful bipartisan engagement, only partisan political stunts. And there's been no due process. Instead, it's a deliberate disregard for the basis of our legal system. It has no constitutional precedent or basis, no real backing by Senate GOP counterparts who are going to hold the trial, no meaningful engagement with policy, and no support from respected legal scholars, political pundits, nor former DHS directors. History will remember this for what it is, an appeasement of the most extreme members of the MAGA base, and put very simply, the brown-nosing of a man with 91 indictments, several convictions, and 2 impeachments. And I yield back.
Reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this impeachment resolution.
As Chairman Green of the Homeland Security Committee has reminded our committee often in recent weeks, James Madison, the father of our Constitution, once said, if an unworthy man be continued in office by an unworthy president, the House of Representatives can at any time impeach him, and the Senate can remove him whether the president chooses or not, end of quote. This impeachment is not about policy difference, though we have them. It is absolutely because Secretary Mayorkas refuses to enforce the laws that are part of our nation's fabric. The rule of law matters. Nobody is above it, including Secretary Mayorkas. Contrary to what he and the president publicly claim, no new laws are needed to stop this crisis. They have created it. Section 212 of the Immigration and Nationality Act already grants them the authority to holler halt. We know that Mayorkas is aware of this provision. On day 5 of the Biden administration, the president suspended entry by those coming from UK, Ireland, Brazil, and South Africa. Secretary Mayorkas has left us with no other option other than impeachment because he refuses to enforce the law. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, Republicans say this impeachment is not about policy disagreements, but every argument they make is about policies. Secretary Mayorkas has taken action to secure the border, but he's used different, more humane policies that are not practical, impeachable. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, our Democratic whip, Ms. Clark.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. We all agree something needs to be done to fix our broken immigration system. But when it comes to doing the work, finding the solutions, House Democrats have come to the table. President Biden has come to the table. The Senate has come to the table. But then there's the House GOP. As the MAGA extremists hold up our national security priorities, our commitment to our allies and to our own readiness, supposedly to strike a deal on immigration. The president says, let's get it done. And then he did. Instead of pursuing a bipartisan compromise, instead of strengthening the security of our border, advancing humane solutions, and doing their jobs, they're now impeaching the Secretary of Homeland Security without a single allegation of any impeachable crime? Not one. Impeaching a cabinet member without any evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors, that is the breach of public trust here. So the plan is to impeach the secretary, and then what? Will the majority invest in Border Patrol? No, their dream budget fires 2,000 Border Patrol agents. Just yesterday, Speaker Johnson ridiculed the men and women of Border Patrol for supporting the Senate bill, saying it's probably because it would give them a fair wage. This majority's contempt for working people, even those whose mission is to carry out border security, has no bounds. This extreme MAGA majority has repeatedly rejected funding for technology that is needed to stop the flow of fentanyl. But here we are. The extreme MAGA majority, what are they going to do about the border? Only this sham impeachment. And they've told us what the future holds. As one member across the aisle put it, they oppose action on immigration because it would boost Biden against Trump. That's all they care about. That's what this sham is about. Choosing extremism over country, stunts over solutions, and politics over people. That is a breach of trust we all must reject. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the resolution to impeach Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. We are here today to address one of the most serious responsibilities that we can undertake as Congress, the impeachment of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The Committee on Homeland Security has worked diligently to investigate and to consider the causes and the consequences of the catastrophe at our southern border. And it has concluded that it is necessary and appropriate to pursue this impeachment. Since President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas took office, there have been over 8.3 illegal crossings nationwide. We have seen the devastating effects of human trafficking, of fentanyl trafficking, and what happens when we cede operational control of our southern border to the Mexican drug cartel. Secretary Mayorkas has refused to enforce the duly enacted laws passed by this Congress. By doing so, he has endangered our homeland, a direct violation of his oath of office. Even in the face of irrefutable evidence to the contrary, he has given false testimony to Congress, claiming that the border is secure. And he has defied court orders ordering the secretary to abandon the illegal programs and policies that it has implemented which incentivize illegal immigration. House Republicans know that border security is national security, and the crisis at our border is a critical threat to national security and the safety of the American people. Secretary Mayorkas has willfully and deliberately refused to uphold the laws of the United States. He has violated his oath of office, and he has breached the public trust. Congress has a constitutional duty to secure our border and to ensure our communities are safe. We cannot allow an executive branch agency head to defy the lawful authority of Congress and of the courts in pursuit of policies that are contrary to law and endangering Americans. And that is why Secretary Mayorkas must be impeached. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the border is not open. In fact, under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, this administration has removed, returned, or expelled more migrants in 3 years than the Trump administration did in 4 years. With that, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, the ranking member on our border subcommittee.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
And thank you, Madam Speaker. We have something in common with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. This country, Main Street, every one of our districts has a challenge with fentanyl. We've all witnessed the deaths in our communities, good young men and women, from fentanyl, from this scourge. But Secretary Mayorkas is doing his job. I want you to look at this graph. The seizures at the border of fentanyl. 2019, 2,800 pounds. 2023, 27,000 pounds of fentanyl seized. Ladies and gentlemen, I just got back again from visiting the border. I went to San Isidro, and again, I asked the men and women in uniform, again, I asked them, what do you need from us to double these numbers? Simple answer. We want more resources. We want more personnel, more drug sniffing dogs. We want more equipment. Some of those agents were struggling. They were working double shifts. Women, moms, men, fathers saying, we don't have time for our families. We're going to have to find another job. And right now, we have a solution. We have legislation that the Senate has worked on with Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, and the president supporting a solution that will bring resources to the border. And the majority party here refuses to bring that legislation forward for a vote. Who's derelict on their duty? We must step up and make sure that we protect Main Street and we help Secretary Mayorkas do his job and double these numbers. Thank you. I yield.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Today is about delivering accountability on behalf of the local and state leaders unable to bear the weight of thousands of illegal immigrants flooding their communities, hospitals, and schools. On behalf of the thousands of families who have lost loved ones at the hands of illegal immigrants. On behalf of hundreds of Border Patrol agents stripped of their tools to do their job. The situation at the border cannot continue. I've seen it firsthand during my trips to the southern border. Mayorkas's refusal to enforce the laws of our nation has encouraged millions of illegal aliens from 160 different countries to cross the border. Over 85% of them are being released into the United States. This is in clear violation of federal immigration law. Failure to act is not an option. The year-long investigation held by the committee confirmed what every American already knew to be true. The actions that we will take today against Secretary Mayorkas are warranted and utterly urgent. Our country is under attack, and the Secretary of Homeland Security is working against America. I urge my
Gentleman's
colleagues
time
to
has
act
expired.
on this critical time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. If my Republican colleagues were serious about the border, they'd drop this baseless impeachment and bring up the Senate bipartisan border agreement for debate. But they aren't serious about reform. Speaker Johnson made it clear the bill was dead on arrival before he saw the text of the bill. I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Ranking Member. On our first Homeland Security Committee hearing, Professor Bowman, an expert in impeachments, made it clear that policy differences are not a legitimate basis for impeachment. There is no legitimate basis for impeachment, yet here we are. Why? Republicans believe persecution is a substitute for policymaking. I guess when you can't legislate, you punish, right? Persecution has become their go-to strategy to score political points. We've seen that on Congressperson Omar, Schiff, Tlaib, even their own Speaker McCarthy, government employees, immigrants, and now Secretary Mayorkas. While great for political theater, persecution and punishment does not solve problems. Policy does. But Republicans are not interested in policy. They shut us down from presenting policy. They even killed a supplemental they had negotiated for months. They're just desperately deflecting attention from their failure to govern to secure their own empty re-elections. If we're serious, we'd be debating policies to address a humanitarian crisis, the root cause of migration, and fentanyl. Clearly, we're not.
Yield an additional 15 seconds to the lady.
Clearly, we are not serious about solutions, just chaos.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, many have said what the issue is. Many have mischaracterized it, in my judgment. The issue presented by the articles of impeachment and why they should be adopted by the House is not a matter of policy. It is not a matter of maladministration. It is not a matter of incompetence. It is not a matter of neglect. It is not even a matter of refusal to enforce the law. It was stated succinctly and aptly in the district court opinion that ultimately led to the United States Supreme Court last summer in Texas, in the United States versus Texas. The core of the dispute is whether the executive branch may require its officials to act in a manner that conflicts with a statutory mandate imposed by Congress. It may not. You see, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, issued guidelines, administrative law, instructing the Department of Homeland Security not to detain criminal aliens, nor those ordered finally removed. That is what he did, and that was flatly contradictory to statutes passed by the Congress in the mid-1990s. We are a nation of laws. The court has said, the Supreme Court has said, it cannot referee this dispute. It is up to Congress. And the Congress has but one means in this situation to vindicate the law. It cannot help the situation by shutting down the government, by cutting off funding. There is no new cabinet secretary to refuse to confirm in the Senate. There is but one means: the impeachment of the secretary who purported to issue law defying the Congress. That must result in his impeachment. If the law is to have any force, if the Congress is to remain of any significance, in the jurisprudence, in the law of the United States.
15 more seconds. Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, Republicans highlight the Secretary's enforcement guidelines as an example of breaking the law. They fail to mention that the conservative Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals said, quote, "The guidance does not necessarily violate a single word of the statute." The Sixth Circuit also found that the provisions of immigration law that Republicans frequently cite does not, quote, "create a judicially enforceable mandate that the department arrest or remove certain non-citizens." I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my colleague for yielding. The power to impeach is one of the greatest constitutional powers granted to the House of Representatives. This awesome responsibility should be reserved for high crimes and misdemeanors. But House Republicans have decided to abuse that responsibility for a cheap political stunt. House Republicans have not even alleged an impeachable offense. Policy disagreements are not impeachable. Even if you strongly believe border security should be improved, that does not provide grounds to remove a cabinet official. That is why former Republican Secretary Michael Chertoff said Mayorkas hasn't committed an impeachable offense. Even law professor Jonathan Turley has said Secretary Mayorkas' alleged actions are not impeachable and fail to, quote, "amount to high crimes and misdemeanors warranting his impeachment." Republicans offered no constitutional scholars as witnesses during their 2 impeachment hearings, but rather relied on Republican states attorney general's testimony, one of which didn't even mention the word impeachment in his prepared testimony.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
I thank my colleague. This unconstitutional impeachment process has been predetermined and unjust since it began. It will lower the constitutional bar for future impeachments, and it will not make our border more secure. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to vote no. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, often known as the Invasion Clause, says that this government will protect every state from invasion. That is something that clearly this secretary is in complete dereliction of duty of. And I know that he swore an oath to protect and defend that Constitution. Now, I'm not sure how many Americans have to die. I'm not sure how many Americans have to die of fentanyl, MS-13 gang members, having their kids raped and murdered. We had one in Homeland Security just a couple weeks ago begging us to do something about this absolutely atrocious leadership from the secretary. But it is high time that this individual be held accountable for his complete dereliction of duty at our southern border. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. And the last thing I want to say is, I think it tells you everything you need to know when my colleagues say it doesn't matter if you impeach Secretary Mayorkas. We're just going to have somebody come in and will you give me another
15 seconds.
We're just going to have somebody come in and do the same exact job. Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud. Yes, your policies are so bad that no matter who you put in there, it will cause the same amount of damage to the American people. The people of this country are watching. Let's get this done.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves, and the members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. And the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, 90% of fentanyl seized is interdicted at ports of entry, mostly in passenger vehicles driven by U.S. citizens and lawful residents, not migrants. If we invest in our ports of entry instead of pursuing this sham impeachment, we can scan more of these vehicles. I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Smoke and mirrors has never been the foundation of the Constitution. And that is all we have today to misrepresent to the American people that we're doing serious work. it comes to mind as to whether or not Secretary Mayorkas is being charged with articles of impeachment because he's a Cuban immigrant who came to the United States with his family as political refugees, that he spent time fleeing the Nazis, that he came here to do his very best for the American people. And yet, we attempt to charge him with willful violation of the law. Operational control of the border means 0 persons coming across. This has not been the case as relates to any secretary, no matter what administration. And yet we failed in this process of false smoke and mirrors to allow the secretary to be able to articulate, or we articulate, any charge that might constitute high crimes and misdemeanors. We failed to provide evidence to support the charges, such as they are. We failed to name the proper
Gentleman's
target.
time has expired.
Generate an additional 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. We failed to name the proper target for impeachment in a policy dispute. We failed to process anything against Secretary Mayorkas. And we could not in any way bring to suggest that he violated the law or that he benefited from any aspect of his work. This secretary has been denied due process. This is smoke and mirrors. The Constitution, the foundation of this land, is truth. There has been no high crimes and misdemeanor or bribery. This is a impeachment that should be immediately dismissed. I ask my colleagues to vote no on the articles of impeachment. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves, and the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
2 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a sad day. It's a sad day that we have to be here, but the framers of our Constitution forecasted that this could occur. And while we're going to hear that this is a policy difference, that this is maladministration, this is the systemic refusal to follow the law, to enforce the law. It's the egregious breach of public trust. And there are no other avenues here. There must be a consequence, there must be accountability, and that's why we are moving to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas for endangering our country. You know, anyone with common sense can see that what is being allowed to happen at our border is not only a catastrophe, but it's a national security crisis. 9 million illegal aliens have entered our country since President Biden has been in office. 300 people have matched the terror watch list. It took less than 20 people to orchestrate the attacks on 9/11, which sent me into 20 years of service to this country to protect us overseas. And yet we're letting the Trojan horse into our country that threatens us. And we have a secretary who refuses to enforce the laws on the books. It is Congress's duty to ensure that the Department of Homeland Security is led by individuals committed to upholding the rule of law, protecting our borders. And the failure to secure the border has been so severe that we have to provide accountability. Not only is this a systemic refusal to follow the law, but it's also the systemic deconstruction of the rule of law that eventually will eat away at this country. I'm so concerned, our country should be concerned, and I urge everyone in this House to do something that actually gets accountability, to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, and to get our country secure once again. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I inquire how much time remains on each side.
The gentleman from Tennessee has 37 1/4 minutes.
And how much?
Gentleman from Mississippi has 39 3/4 minutes.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, daily removals are nearly double what they were compared to pre-pandemic averages. The vast majority of individuals encountered at the southwest border throughout this administration have been removed, returned, or expelled. Secretary Mayorkas is enforcing the law. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Dr. Ruiz.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I rise to call out the hypocrisy and extreme political stunts Republicans are displaying with this baseless and unconstitutional impeachment against the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Instead of seeking bipartisan solutions, they voted to cut border security funding. Let me repeat, cut border security funding, and are now bringing an impeachment that lacks basis in law just to pull another one of their political stunts. Secretary Mayorkas has dedicated his career to public service and our country. During his time in the department, he led the development and implementation of DACA and led the department's successful response to Ebola and Zika outbreaks. He's worked tirelessly on combating human trafficking and developed an emergency relief program for orphaned youth following the tragic January 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Secretary Mayorkas has done the work he was tasked to do by the president and more. Stop wasting time on yet another extreme political farce. Start working with Democrats for a bipartisan real solution. Thank you.
Gentleman,
and I
time's
yield back.
expired. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to urge support of Res 863, the Articles of Impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. It is clear that Secretary Mayorkas has willfully and systematically refused to comply with U.S. immigration law. An average of 5,000 illegal immigrants are being released into the United States each day, which is a flagrant abuse of immigration laws passed by Congress governing the parole, detention, and removal of illegal immigrants. For 3 years, Secretary Mayorkas has refused to enforce the laws passed by Congress, abused his authority as a cabinet secretary, and misled Congress and the American people about the crisis and the role his actions and decisions have played in sparking and facilitating it. As a result, we see record amounts of deadly fentanyl flowing into our communities, rising crime across our country, and a massive strain on our locality, schools, and community services. Since Secretary Mayorkas' tenure, over 300 individuals on the terrorist watch list have been apprehended by Border Patrol agents trying to illegally enter the United States at the southern border between ports of entry.
Gentleman's time is
And
expired.
Cartels in Mexico.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
15 seconds.
Thank you. And cartels in Mexico are empowered to expand lucrative human trafficking and smuggling operations across the porous southern border. The actions of Secretary Mayorkas have led to a complete humanitarian and national security catastrophe. Congress must hold the executive branch accountable when they fail to uphold the oath of office, and I urge my colleagues to join me in voting in favor of Res 863.
The gentleman's time is expired.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam Speaker, Republicans ignore the fact that no administration has ever had the resources to detain all border crossers. President Trump released over 500,000 people without ever detaining any of them. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the ranking member on Judiciary, Mr. Nadler.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the sham impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. This resolution is filled with false and misleading statements that amount to nothing more than policy disagreements. Even if it were based in truth, however, policy disagreements are not a legitimate basis for impeachment. Impeaching a cabinet secretary is serious. Unfortunately, House Republicans are not. This sham impeachment ran roughshod over due process and completely bypassed the Judiciary Committee, the committee of jurisdiction for impeachment. This is not a serious effort, nor is it a serious resolution. Republicans allege that Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached simply because he failed to meet the impossible standards set out in our laws, standards that no administration, not even President Trump's, has ever come close to meeting. For example, they allege that Secretary Mayorkas has failed to detain everyone that the law requires to be held in mandatory detention. But to do so would require Congress to appropriate over $35 billion a year, a number 10 times higher than President Trump ever requested for detention. That's why the Trump administration released over 500,000 people at the U.S.-Mexico border and released 1.1 million people from immigration detention into the United States. But did we hear calls from the Republicans to impeach Secretaries Kelly, Duke, or Nielsen? Of course not. The resolution also takes aim at the Secretary's use of his parole authority. But Republicans never complained when President Trump used his parole authority for tens of thousands of Cubans and military families. So what's different now? Could it be that it's an election year and Republicans have no record of accomplishments to run on? With no ideas, no agenda, no ability to govern, they are cheapening the serious and awesome power of impeachment to score a few cheap political points. That is shameful. Our immigration system has been broken for decades. Impeaching a cabinet secretary because you do not like their policies will not repair it. Only bipartisan reform can do that. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves, gentleman from Mississippi reserves, gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. His actions support law-breaking and lawlessness and have inflicted a horrific toll on our country. The kind of damage he's done to our cities and our families is something you'd expect from a hostile foreign adversary looking to destabilize and destroy America. Our cities are overrun, forcing vital services to be cut off or reduced, shutting down our schools to house illegal migrants, turning community centers into refugee camps, all while ignoring the needs of our own citizens. There are more than 110,000 dead Americans from fentanyl that is being smuggled by Mexican cartels. We see criminal illegal immigrants committing murder, rape, and beating our police in broad daylight. This is far more than a policy difference. This is the death and destruction of our country and our people. And I will not stand by and just politely ask the Biden administration to please stop the chaos and devastation. In a functioning government, people need to be held accountable when they have deliberately inflicted harm on our nation, and that is exactly what we are doing today. I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if my Republican colleagues were worried about the impacts of migration on our local communities, they should support DHS's Shelter and Services program. This is the only federal program that can provide direct assistance to cities and organizations responding to arriving migrants. Instead, they're trying to gut this program and impeach Secretary Mayorkas, which would accomplish nothing. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
This is not about Secretary Mayorkas. This is straight up sabotage. MAGA Republicans have never accepted President Biden as the president from the day they led an insurrection into this chamber to this day where they're trying to sabotage solutions at the border. Any shortcomings with Mayorkas are your fault. You won't give him the authorities that he needs to carry out more security at the border. And all we've heard for years is noun, verb, border. So you get your border deal led by the second most conservative in the Senate, and you're walking away from it. You're walking away from it because Trump says you can't have it. And this place with you all in charge is looking less and less like the House chamber and more like Trump's echo chamber. What we need right now are solutions, not chaos. And with you all in charge, you're a party of followers. And with President Biden's leadership, Democrats continue to show we're a party of leaders. And I yield back.
I want to remind members that they are to address their remarks to the chair. The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the House rules. The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it interesting that how many Democrats or open border caucus members, or I apologize for my redundancy there, are willing to house migrants in their own homes, Madam Speaker. None, zero, nada. They seem to all be for providing sanctuary, provided they don't have to provide it. Alejandro Mayorkas, under oath, testified before Congress and claimed the border is no less secure than it was previously. Does anyone in this chamber actually believe that? Does anyone in this country believe that? So let's compare the first 3 years of President Trump and Biden's tenures. President Trump, first 3 years, 1.6 million illegal crossings. Joe Biden, 8.3 million, a 519% increase. Terror watch list suspects apprehended. Under President Trump, 8 in 3 years. Joe Biden, 361, a 4,512% increase. Chinese nationals, mostly of military age men entering illegally. Last year under President Trump was 450. Under Joe Biden, over 24,000, a 5,333% increase. No less secure. That the new math? Opioid deaths have doubled. The Mexican drug cartels are enjoying record profits. Alejandro Mayorkas fostered this mayhem, and he facilitated a cataclysmic chaos. He's inept, he's weak, he's impotent. He's violated federal law, he's purged himself in front of Congress, he's lied to the American people, and he's undermined his own Border Patrol agents. Mayorkas has shown the world who he is. He is a sheep in sheep's clothing. And the cartel wolves and our enemies across the world are circling. This impeachment is richly deserved, and we must fire this bum, this second coming of Benedict Arnold, forthwith. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let's look at the facts. Since May 12, 2023, when Title 42 ended, DHS has removed more than 500,000 individuals. That's more people than when Donald Trump removed in any given year. The border is not open. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Chairman, we're here because the madcap wild goose chase to impeach Joe Biden has produced no wild geese. Even Fox News is lampooning the fact that their own expert witnesses repeatedly say President Biden did nothing wrong and there are no grounds for impeachment. More than a dozen GOP members in Biden majority districts don't want to go anywhere near that fantasy production. So the Trump-Putin mega faction, headed up by the distinguished gentlelady from Georgia, has been given this worthless trinket of a consolation prize, the opportunity to bring a slapstick impeachment drive against a cabinet member of unimpeachable integrity who has obviously committed no treason, no bribery, no high crimes, no misdemeanors, nothing indictable or even indictable, if you prefer. What makes this farce a tragedy is that Secretary Mayorkas and the U.S. Senate have been working for months to achieve precisely the immigration and border compromise the GOP has been demanding. And miraculously, they got to a bipartisan immigration agreement for billions of dollars more in Border Patrol officers, immigration judges, fentanyl detection machines, a far tougher border. It was good enough for Senator Mitch McConnell and dozens of GOP senators, and it was good enough for the Wall Street Journal, but the House MAGAs would not take yes for an answer. Why? Because Donald Trump doesn't want a border solution. He wants a border problem, nothing else to run on. And Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want $60 billion going to the heroic people of Ukraine, defying his filthy imperialist invasion. All over the world, democracy and freedom are under siege today, and all our colleagues can think to do is to sell out our Democratic allies and sell out the cause of human rights, and then impeach a cabinet secretary working diligently to solve the immigration problem that they claim to care about. I yield back.
The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas swore an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Unfortunately, it seems as though he hasn't defended it from a single one. Since President Biden took office, there have been more than 7 million illegal encounters at our southern border and more than 1.7 million known gotaways. Not once has Secretary Mayorkas issued a statement, signed a policy, or taken an action to discourage this from happening. In fact, he has doubled down and encouraged the invasion by endorsing catch and release policies, ending Title 42, and stopping Remain in Mexico. This subversion of our Constitution, willful disregard of our country's laws, and unfettered dedication to exacerbating this self-inflicted crisis have left the House with no other option than to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Madam Speaker, I urge the House to join me in voting to impeach Secretary Mayorkas and urge the Senate to remove him from his position. Thank you, and I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I remind my colleagues that they voted to terminate the COVID-19 national emergency and thus voted to end Title 42. In addition, DHS has no role in ending this policy. I now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. You know, the American people want us to be working together to solve our challenges at the border. We could be working together to vote on President Biden's proposal for $14 billion of funding that would add over 1,000 Border Patrol officers. We could be working with the Senate on real immigration reform that Republicans claimed they wanted until Donald Trump told them that they didn't. But instead, we are wasting time and energy on an impeachment with no legal basis just because it's what Donald Trump wants. Here are the facts. The facts are this. Congress has allocated funding for 34,000 beds at detention centers. The average daily census last year was 37,000. The centers are full. And so the secretary, under the law, uses his legal discretion to decide who to detain and who to release. The same legal discretion that all of his predecessors have used. In the last 2 years of the Trump administration, 52% of migrants were released, nearly 1 million people. And I did not hear my House Republican colleagues calling to impeach that Homeland Security Secretary. No, this is about one thing, politics. There are no high crimes, no misdemeanors, no treason, no bribery. And I would remind my colleagues, our oath is to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. And I yield back.
The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Betts.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Green. It's been said that Secretary Mayorkas is dishonest, duplicitous, and derelict in his duties, and I agree. However, he has also willfully refused to comply with and enforce our nation's immigration laws and explicitly instructed his employees to not enforce these laws. Additionally, the Secretary has willfully obstructed inquiries of my Judiciary Committee regarding entry of illegal aliens into our country. The constitutional standard for impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas has been satisfied. I want to commend Chair Mark Green for his excellent work in managing this important constitutional matter and in following regular order. While doing so, I yield back.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam Speaker, despite the Republicans want us to believe, the courts at the highest level have not found that Secretary Mayorkas is violating the law, and courts are where we go to determine whether a cabinet secretary is following the law Congress wrote, not a partisan impeachment. I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I rise today in strong opposition to the GOP's political stunt of the day, impeaching Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. The real problem here is congressional inaction on immigration reform. My community of El Paso, Texas, on the U.S.-Mexico border, has been on the front lines of this issue and living with the consequences of congressional failure to act. Our federal personnel, local governments, and shelters are all overwhelmed. And Republicans continue to withhold vital funding that would help address this issue. As a border legislator, I've never met a more committed, accessible cabinet member than Secretary Mayorkas. He is a great public servant doing everything he can with the limited resources Congress has given to him. I invite my Republican colleagues who want to solve this, who really want to solve this, to join the bipartisan coalition supporting the Dignity Act. Stop playing games and do your job. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to express my support for impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas for reasons outlined in both articles of impeachment, but specifically for Article 2, breach of public trust. Secretary Mayorkas has repeatedly testified falsely, misleading Congress and the American people. He's done so by saying that the southwest border is secure and that his department has operational control of the border. Secretary Mayorkas, in his previous appearances before the Committee on Homeland Security has told me personally on multiple times, testifying while under oath, that the border is secure. And I know that time and time again, Secretary Mayorkas has appeared before Congress, both the United States House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, and has repeated the security of our southwest border. These declarations, Madam Speaker, are patently untrue, and they contradict statements made by both his former Border Patrol Chief, Raul Ortiz, and by the President himself. President Biden, who just recently said and admitted that the border was not secure. And he went on to say that the border has not been secured for almost a decade. Madam Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas' dealings with Congress, they indicate a lack of transparency and an attempt to mislead the public on the true conditions that exist at the border. And we as Congress, we must now hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable. This is a grave day in our history, a grave day for this nation, and not one that we take lightly. However, in light of all the facts, I urge my colleagues to join me in voting to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, my Republican colleagues won't admit that this impeachment is a sham, but their favorite conservative legal experts will. President Trump's impeachment attorney, Alan Dershowitz, accused Republicans of, quote, distorting the Constitution, unquote. And Republicans' favorite legal witness, Jonathan Turley, said that there is, quote, no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas is corrupt or committed an impeachable offense, unquote. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to oppose the partisan sham impeachment proceedings against a dedicated and honorable public servant, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Secretary Mayorkas has done his job while operating within a broken immigration system that this Congress has refused to fix. Instead of working with House Democrats and the Biden administration on serious solutions, House Republicans are focused on one thing: appeasing former President Donald Trump. This impeachment is an unconstitutional abuse of power. It is clear that policy differences are not grounds for impeachment. Even worse than the partisan nature of these proceedings are the alleged facts that they are based on. To build their case, House Republicans work with and cite reports from groups such as the Center for Immigration Studies, a Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group. When I attempted to introduce an amendment to point this out, it was rejected by House Republicans twice in committee, once in Homeland and once in Rules. All because Republicans don't want Americans to know the baseless and completely unprecedented nature of this
gentleman's time has expired.
Additional 30 seconds.
That anti-migrant hate groups form the foundation of the case that we are listening to today. I stand with my Democratic colleagues against this partisan impeachment, and I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote no. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. You know, James Iredale, one of the founders from North Carolina, talking about this impeachment clause, said the power of impeachment is given by this Constitution to bring great offenders to punishment. It's calculated to bring them to punishment for crime which is not easy to describe, but which everyone must be convinced is a high crime and misdemeanor against government. For instance, corruption. Let's do here. Its exercise, the impeachment, will arise from acts of great injury to the community, and the objects of it may be such as cannot be easily reached by an ordinary tribunal. That's why you have impeachment. And that's necessary here because what you have is a secretary who came into judiciary. He's given the language from the Safe and Secure Fence Act of 2006 and said, is the border under operational control? He says, well, no, we've redefined it ourselves. We're comfortable with the new definition that we've made. That's a violation of the separation of powers. This is the same secretary who tells his ICE agents, you know what,
Gentleman's
you
time has
cannot.
expired.
Additional 30 seconds.
He tells his ICE agents, you cannot remove 1 million, 1.2 million people who have actually had due process through the courts and have active removal orders. He's the same one who says we don't have to adhere to Title VIII. That has resulted in great injury to our communities. And that is why he must be impeached, because he falls in the definitions that one of the founders, James Iredell, said. And he's right on the money. And I urge everyone to support this movement to impeach. Yield
Gentleman's
back.
time expired.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the definition of operational control in the Secure Fence Act of 2006 has never been achieved under any administration, including the Trump administration. This is not grounds for impeachment. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, Republicans are engaging in yet another impeachment scam. We're here today because the majority wants to attack President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas, all to elect Donald Trump. The insane leader of their party claims that immigrants like me, and I quote, pollute the blood of this country. Donald Trump's rhetoric is just like Hitler's. And he wants chaos. He thinks the border crisis helps him, so he wants it to continue. And in fact, Border Patrol apprehensions more than tripled in the last 8 months of the Trump presidency. But let's remember the Donald Trump and MAGA vision for border security. These are actually some of their ideas. Donald Trump wants to build alligator moats. He's proposed bombing Mexico. He's actually said we should shoot migrants in the legs and maybe even electrify the fence. These are cruel and ridiculous ideas, that they are proposals of Donald Trump and the MAGA right. This extreme political stunt should fail. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. A gentleman from Mississippi Reserve, gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my colleague, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and I respect my colleagues across the aisle who have voiced their opposition. It's important that we clarify the legacy that some of us would condemn by impeaching the secretary responsible for this legacy, and by contrast, the legacy that my colleagues who oppose the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas would support. 300,000 Americans dead from cartel drugs. 100,000 teenage girls and boys missing, lost by the Mayorkas system into the unspeakable horror of sex slavery networks across the filthiest corners of criminal organizations in our cities. American sovereignty disintegrated. American soil lost to cartel human and drug trafficking bases. Millions of single military-age men from over 100 countries, unvetted, released into our country, creeping into every corner of American society, every city, every town. Our schools overrun by illegals, granted free access to American education infrastructure in hundreds of reports, with no room left for our own children. Hundreds of thousands of violent criminals released into our nation, despite federal law stating that DHS shall detain known criminals who enter America illegally. 1,000 or more known or suspected terrorists allowed to pass freely into the heart of our nation, into my state, into yours. This is the legacy of Alejandro Mayorkas. And by our oath, we must impeach this man who has presented an arrogant, defiant tone of denial and lies to Congress for 3 years, seemingly content or even proud to destroy America day by day. So it is that on this day, it shall be written in the historical record of the People's House that Secretary of Department of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas has been impeached. So shall it be written. So shall it be done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my Republican colleagues are starving DHS of necessary border security resources while accusing Secretary Mayorkas of not doing his job. House Republicans refuse to consider the White House's $13.6 billion border supplemental funding request that would pay for more border agents and officers and detention beds. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this resolution to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. This resolution is as ridiculous as it is dangerous. It has no evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. Are we really debating impeaching a cabinet secretary because House Republicans don't like the policies that he advances under a democratically elected president? Far from alleging true high crimes and misdemeanors, this resolution relies on the same tired and untrue Republican talking points that Democrats have demonstrated for months are not true. With this Marjorie Taylor Greene sham impeachment resolution, the majority is bending to the will of the most extreme members of their conference simply because they don't like the policies that Secretary Mayorkas is pursuing. Secretary Mayorkas is an excellent and dedicated public servant working tirelessly to protect our national security and to address a broken immigration system. And this Republican Congress, the least productive Congress in the history of the United States, having passed only 27 bills that have been signed into law despite over 700 votes in this body, is simply trying to distract the American people from the fact that they are not doing a single thing to address the lives of ordinary Americans across this country. I keep thinking that the House cannot debase itself further, Mr. Speaker, but it appears that we have not reached rock bottom yet. Vote no on this sham of an impeachment. I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona for 2 minutes, Mr. Siscomani.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chairman Green, for yielding me time. Let me start with this. The House is pursuing impeachment because there is no option left. Secretary Mayorkas has abandoned his job, and he has abandoned the American people. As the charges describe, the Secretary has willfully and systematically refused to comply with the law. And he's put our communities and our country at risk by doing so. This is not an action we take lightly. The last time his cabinet secretary was impeached was in 1876. This is a historic impeachment for someone with historic failures. The time has run out for Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to be able to do his job. In order to secure our communities, protect our homeland, and keep Americans safe, Secretary Mayorkas has got to go. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record op-eds from frequent conservative legal commentator Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz opposing the Mayorkas impeachment despite their policy disagreements with the Biden administration. I also include in the record a January 30th, 2024 editorial by the conservative Wall Street Journal titled "Impeaching Mayorkas Achieves Nothing."
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve balance.
Gentleman from Mississippi reserve. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from California for 2 minutes, Mr. Issa.
The distinguished gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is so frustrating because today we are, in fact, impeaching a pawn. We're impeaching a pawn for the president. The secretary is being impeached for what he did wrong. He is in fact guilty as alleged, but in fact, he is just part of the high crimes and misdemeanor of the President of the United States. It was the President's decision to, in fact, undo policies that were working, to revert dramatic change that in my district, with over 55 miles of Mexican border, my border agents are reduced to being Uber drivers for everyone coming over the border. I am perfectly willing to listen to people say, well, this is a policy difference, but it is not. To faithfully execute the mission, you can have differences in how to do it. To thwart the very execution of that mission, which Secretary Mayorkas has done, is in fact impeachable. I have some sympathy for him because I believe he is just obeying the order. But that has been said before. That excuse has been used. The fact is he took an oath. He must faithfully execute that oath. If he cannot, because the president will not let him do it, then he needs to resign. As we impeach the first cabinet officer in well over 100 years, the fact is he should have resigned rather than to do things which were adverse to the Constitution, adverse to his oath, but upon the orders and duty of the president. The president can be wrong. The president can order high crimes and misdemeanors. The president can be guilty of them. This president is, in fact, guilty of that which we are impeaching the secretary for today, but so is the secretary. And for that reason, I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire about how much time remains for each side?
Gentleman from Tennessee has 22 and a half minutes. Gentleman from Mississippi has 24. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, this baseless sham impeachment fails to articulate a single charge that rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. The constitutional standard for impeachment. Mere policy differences do not amount to impeachable offenses. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter by eminent constitutional scholars opposed to this political stunt, as well as a Washington Post op-ed by Joshua Metz and Norm Eisen titled "Why Impeaching Mayorkas Would Violate the Constitution."
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now recognize for 2 minutes, or I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Oklahoma, Mrs. Bice.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in this debate, the gentleman from Mississippi noted that there has been more fentanyl seized at our southern border than ever before. But what he did not also recognize is that there are now more fentanyl deaths in this country than ever before. And that is a direct result of what is happening across our southern border. I rise today in support of the impeachment of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. This is one of the most solemn and consequential actions the United States House of Representatives can take, and I do not take it lightly. However, under the watch of Secretary Mayorkas, we have witnessed the degradation of our border security and the willful and consistent refusal to comply with and enforce federal immigration laws. Today, fentanyl is the leading cause of death for those ages 18 to 45. Terrorists on the FBI watch list are being released into the interior of the country, and the cartels are a multi-billion-dollar business. The crisis we face today is a threat to every single American, causing our communities to be less safe, and it is a direct result of Secretary Mayorkas' actions. A clear message must be sent to the executive branch that they no longer get to.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, today 3 bipartisan former secretaries of Homeland Security wrote to Speaker Johnson voicing their opposition to impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. They agree that impeachment for a policy is not constitutionally permissible. They further warn that allowing impeachment of cabinet officials over policy differences would jeopardize our national security. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record the letter from Secretaries Chertoff, Napolitano, and Johnson.
Without objection.
And yielding 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend, the ranking member, for yielding. I rise today to condemn this rushed, baseless, sham impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas that will go down in history as one of Congress's darkest moments. The Republican argument for impeachment boils down to their view that Secretary Mayorkas has intentionally caused the influx of immigrants over our southern border. Never mind that even if true, this is not a high crime or misdemeanor that has ever been used before in the history of our country. Never mind that no court has found the Secretary or the Department of Homeland Security to have violated the law. And in fact, the United States versus Texas case, which my friends on the other side of the aisle like to cite so frequently, actually reversed a district court ruling and held that there must be discretion given to the secretary, as there has been given to every single department secretary for 27 years. And never mind that every one of those Department of Homeland Security secretaries has interpreted the law the exact same way that Secretary Mayorkas has. Never mind that Republicans have sued him to stop him from implementing the policy changes that the administration has tried to put in effect to address the situation at the border. Never mind that House Republicans are impeaching him for failing to address the problems at the border while he has spent months negotiating a bipartisan bill in the Senate to do just that. The reason for this partisan stunt is simple. Donald Trump and House Republicans want to use the border as an election year issue rather than actually solve the problems through necessary legislation. I urge my colleagues who care about the Constitution, the rule of law in this institution to vote no. You will otherwise come to regret this.
Gentleman's time
And I
is
yield
expired.
back.
Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, General Bergman.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last Secretary of Homeland Security appointed by a Democrat president once described the border crisis as more than 1,000 Border Patrol encounters per day. In December last year, we averaged nearly 10 times that number. Perhaps most worryingly, 2023 saw a record-setting 860,000, just a little bit shy of 1 million gotaways, border crossers who were detected but who were never apprehended. That's nearly 1 million potential felons, cartel members, terrorists, and drug traffickers freely allowed into our country and currently residing in our communities and our neighborhoods. This crisis has been aided and abetted through the unprecedented dereliction of duty of Secretary Mayorkas. As the House Homeland Security Committee has uncovered, Mayorkas has repeatedly violated, subverted, and simply ignored multiple laws set forth by Congress that he swore an oath to uphold, all while ignoring court orders and lying to Congress and the American people. The evidence of his wrongdoings is damning. His abuse of power goes well beyond simple bureaucratic incompetence, and his actions, which have put our nation at extreme risk, cannot go unanswered. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Republicans are exploiting impeachment power to distract from their inability to pass legislation. Here's what Republican Representative Chip Roy said in November, quote, "I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, one that I can go campaign on and say we did, one. Explain to me one material, meaningful, significant thing the Republican majority has done." I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the Democratic leader, Honorable Hakeem Jeffries.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Let me first just thank the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Mississippi for yielding, for his leadership, for his dignity, for his decency, for his continued defense of our democracy in the face of the extreme attacks coming from the other side of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to this political stunt, this reckless Republican effort to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Let's be clear, Secretary Mayorkas is a good man, a patriotic man, and a hardworking man doing the best he can under very difficult circumstances. That's not an impeachable offense. Extreme MAGA Republicans have produced no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has engaged in a high crime or misdemeanor, no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has engaged in an impeachable offense, and no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has broken the law or violated the Constitution. Not a shred of evidence, not a scintilla of evidence, nothing but extreme MAGA Republican chaos and confusion, and the effort to avoid doing the hard work necessary to find common ground to actually address the challenges at the border. What do these impeachment articles have to do with the issue of addressing our broken immigration system? Nothing. What do these impeachment articles have to do with building a healthy economy for everyday Americans? Nothing. What do these impeachment articles have to do with addressing the inflationary challenges and the affordability issues that the American people are experiencing day after day as we work to continue to emerge from a once-in-a-century pandemic that shut down the economy? Absolutely nothing. Extreme MAGA Republicans have spent this entire Congress not advancing any ideas, acting on any agenda, deciding to work together with us to solve problems for the American people. And so you've brought articles of impeachment that are not anchored in reality. You've brought articles of impeachment for one simple reason: because you really want to impeach Joe Biden. That's what you were directed to do by the puppet master, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. You really want to impeach Joe Biden, but you realize that that is politically unpopular. And so you've brilliantly come up with, in your minds, Plan B. Let's go after Secretary Mayorkas. No evidence that he's engaged in wrongdoing, committed a crime, or violated the Constitution, but let's go after Secretary Mayorkas. Maybe that will satisfy the quest for revenge of the puppet master. Because when the puppet master, Donald Trump, says jump, extreme MAGA Republicans respond, how high? We just got evidence of that over the last few weeks because extreme MAGA Republicans have been lecturing America that we have to deal with the challenges at the border. We agree. A bipartisan process has been underway in the Senate for months to try to fix our broken immigration system. But as soon as Donald Trump says, no, we actually don't want to do anything about the challenges at the border, because politically that might not be good for us, you've walked away from working together in a common sense fashion to fix our broken immigration system. And so instead, what you have to offer the American people is this sham impeachment, this political stunt, this waste of time. But you will not fool the American people. You will actually be held accountable for your inaction and your affirmative leaning in to doing things that don't advance progress in any way, shape, or form for the American people. No reasonable American can conclude that you're making life better for them with this sham impeachment. But you will live with this like a scarlet letter. It may succeed, it may not. Secretary Mayorkas should wear this like a badge of honor because it's worthless. It means nothing. It's fake, it's fraudulent, and it's foolish. And I urge everybody to vote no so we can get back to doing the real business of the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Chairwoman Fox.
Gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Tennessee for yielding and his great work on this impeachment resolution. Mr. Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas' political career is on the chopping block where it rightfully belongs. He has failed to apply the laws that would stop this invasion at the southern border. To those who claim that this impeachment is for purely political purposes, you're dead wrong. This is about upholding the rule of law that governs our republic, the same rule of law that Secretary Mayorkas has ignored and forsaken every day. Secretary Mayorkas has had innumerable opportunities to enforce the laws that are already on the books, but has chosen not to. He has earned his own impeachment. Let's be clear. Our entire constitutional system is predicated on the idea that Congress creates laws and the executive branch enforces those laws. Allowing this abuse of our constitutional system to go unchecked could spell the beginning of the end for our republic. I'm proud to say the rule of law must be restored at the border immediately. And with that, I yield back my time to the gentleman from Tennessee.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Republicans use the language of invasion and great replacement theory. But look, invasion in the Constitution means invasion during an act of war by a foreign nation or insurrection from within. I direct my Republican colleagues to the Federalist Paper number 4 and 43 if they want to learn why the entry of migrants escaping crisis for a better life is not invasion. I now yield. I reserve.
This gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Chairman Arrington.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank our fearless leader and good gentleman from Tennessee, and just a comment about this not being an invasion. No honest or objective American from sea to shining sea could characterize what's happening at our southern border in any way other than an invasion. And it's destroying our country. And it's because of the willful neglect It's because of the dereliction of duty. It's because of the faithlessness to this Constitution and its first job to provide a common defense. I want to thank Chairman Green for restoring the dignity and integrity of the impeachment process. I think it's important that we are careful, that we make the fullness of due process an important feature, restoring what's happened over the last 2 impeachments. This is a year-long process, and I appreciate your fidelity to the Constitution and the integrity of this institution. Look, bottom line, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the impeachment clause in the Constitution, according to our founders, was to give remedy for this very circumstance, to remove someone who had violated their public trust in a way that resulted in serious and systemic injury to society. So Chairman Green, again, thank you for your leadership. I stand with you. This is the right and responsible thing to do in faithfulness to the Constitution, in the protection of the American people, and in defense of the sovereignty of the greatest nation in human history. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the extreme mega Republican stunt to impeach Secretary Mayorkas is baseless. The Democratic staff of the Committee on Homeland Security thoroughly documented the many failures of fact and law in the articles of impeachment contained in Resolution 868. I ask unanimous consent that it be included in the record.
Without objection.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentleman. In the time that we've had to debate one of the most sacred and deliberative responsibilities of the United States Congress, and that is impeachment proceedings, there has been not one iota of truth and or facts that would suggest that Secretary Mayorkas is in fact guilty of the articles of impeachment against him. One, the willful violation of the law, and the benefit to himself from anything that he might have done or that he did not do. But what it has done is given to this nation, a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, the sense that you cannot flee Nazism, you cannot flee Cuba, and for more than 2 decades come to this country to serve your beloved adopted country, that you cannot be the Justice Department U.S. Attorney, you cannot be a Deputy Secretary, and now the Secretary of Homeland Security, without those who find it strange to have you with your diversity to be able to lead in this way. This is a question of stunts over solutions, and the Constitution was created to create a more perfect order, and that is that under that Constitution, precious rights fall under the 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, due process. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that this Secretary of Homeland Security was not allowed to bring his own witnesses. The majority did not allow the minority to have its day of witnesses. There were no constitutional scholars who pointed to the fact in large numbers, as they would have, that this is in fact a fraud, and it is fraught with misrepresentations. Operational control is 0 people crossing the border. That means they're not crossing for entertainment, they're not crossing for business, they are just there. This is wrong, this is wrong-headed, this is a stunt, and this does not bequeath or equal to the Constitution, which is to create a more perfect union. Vote against these articles of impeachment. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Mississippi reserved. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke.
Gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of House Resolution 863, the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. You know, Montana is about the same size as from here to Chicago plus 2 miles. It's a long, long border. And the few border people we have generally are deployed down south. So my friend and gentleman from New York said, what evidence do we offer? What evidence of negligence? What evidence of wrongdoing? I'd say it's pretty easy to find. It's found in every street, every city, every county, every state across this nation. The evidence is found in every fentanyl pill and death. The evidence is found in every woman that's raped along our border. The evidence is found in every child trafficking case. It is in every city, to include Billings, Missoula, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. It's found in every evidence of children being sex trafficked. And I can go on. The evidence of negligence is the willful and blind turning of this horror that we have in our southern border. Our northern border, while not discussed a lot, is wide open because this country doesn't have a border. And in Montana, this administration can't even prevent a balloon. So the evidence is clear, compelling, and not in dispute. The lack of action and blindfold and willingness to do nothing is deserving no less than impeachment. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas is doing his job with the resources allotted by this Congress. Not only has no administration detained all border crossers, but Congress has never appropriated sufficient resources to detain all individuals who should be detained under the Republicans' reading of the law. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman. This impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas is a sham. The process was a sham. The charges are a sham. And you might wonder, if that's the case, then why go through all of this trouble? Well, last November, a colleague of mine from the state of Texas stood up in this chamber and asked for one meaningful accomplishment that the Republican Congress has accomplished this session. The answer was nothing. That colleague was not a Democrat on this side of the aisle, but a Republican. A Republican who asked the question whether somebody could name one meaningful accomplishment. So the answer to my question, why does this happen? When you have no record of accomplishment to run on, nothing on education, nothing on healthcare, nothing about creating jobs, nothing on the environment, nothing about keeping people safe, this is what you do. You put on a circus. And that's why we're here today. If we need an example, let's look to the last few days. For years, Republicans have used immigrants as political scarecrows, using them like scarecrows to put up in the face of Americans and scare Americans that every single one of these people, including the 6-year-old children, is coming to harm you and hurt you. And because they have no positive policy solutions, man, they sell that really hard. You hear it on every radio interview, every television interview. You hear it from the people in here. You hear it on television, on Fox News, every single place. They use these people to scare Americans. That's how they want to win. And that's why we're here. Because there's nothing else left. And on the border,
Gentleman,
I would ask for
Additional 30 seconds.
gentleman recognized for additional 30 seconds.
They have claimed that we need to secure the border. But even when President Biden made the comment that he would be willing to shut down the border because it's overwhelmed, the Republican speaker says that that proposal that would allow for it, what they've been asking for supposedly for years, they say it's dead on arrival. They're not going to do it. This is a show trial. It's a sham. I yield back, Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, before coming to Congress, I spent 8 years as a sheriff in my home county and 42 years as a law enforcement officer. If I hadn't have done my job as a sheriff, I would have been fired and removed from office. Mr. Speaker, Secretary Mayorkas has not done his job. He has willfully ignored immigration laws passed by the Congress and allowed our southern border to turn into utter chaos. His breach of the public trust cannot go unanswered. I voted to hold him accountable in committee last week, and I will do so today on the floor. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this impeachment and hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable for his actions. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Barragan.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member Thompson. I rise to oppose this baseless, politically driven impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas by extreme MAGA Republicans. House Republicans have failed to meet the constitutional standard for impeachment. They have failed to provide evidence for high crimes and misdemeanors because no evidence exists. Republicans rant about challenges at the southern border, and their only solution is to remove the person who has been in the room trying to work on a bipartisan basis to get tough on border policies that I don't even agree with. Republicans are not serious about border security. This is all about politics for them. They have consistently opposed legislation to increase funding for more Border Patrol agents at the southern border, more Customs and Border Protection, more money to combat fentanyl from coming across the southern border, something they love to talk about, but they want to put no resources to make sure that it's not coming over. And of course, they've even said no to $1 billion in ICE detention beds. This is a Republican talking point, and they have said no to this too. So why are we wasting floor time on political games with the fact-free impeachment resolution instead of legislation to improve the lives of Americans? Because House Republicans can't govern. They want to distract from their weekly embarrassments. Their own members admit they have not accomplished anything. This sham impeachment is not an accomplishment. It's just another embarrassment because they are a do-nothing Congress. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire as to how much time remains for each side?
Gentleman from Tennessee has 12 minutes, 12 and a half. Gentleman from Mississippi has 12.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to address some of the, at a minimum, misinformation that's been provided by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. This notion that Republicans have somehow cut Border Patrol is absolutely false. In fact, it's been the administration that's brought decreasing budget requests, for example, for ICE detention beds every single year, and we've wound up giving them more than they've asked for. Our bill, H.R. 2, House Resolution 2, actually would provide 3,000 new Border Patrol agents, and the supplemental request by the president's like 1,400. I mean, you can't say we're resourcing less when we're actually providing numbers for more. I mean, that's just disinformation. It's false. This notion that seizures are up. I mean, if you pour more water through a small pipe, you're going to catch them. If there's more volume coming at the fence, they're going to seize more. I get that. But tell me why the price of fentanyl in Tennessee for a hit of it on the street went from $95 a hit when this president took office to $28 a hit. It's because the supply and demand of fentanyl. It's, supply and demand curve. And that's because it's pouring across our southern border. It's pouring across our southern border because the cartels are jamming folks through the crossing sites. The Border Patrol agents are having to move off the border to cover that, and we have a wide open southern border. We've shown this in our 5 phases investigation, videos of, camouflage wearing, carpet shoe wearing people with backpacks full of drugs coming through the remote parts of the country or the border. It's to suggest that just because seizures are up, somebody's doing their job, that's meaningless. I want to make a point here because several people have said if we were concerned about border protection, we would bring up the Senate negotiated bill. Well, I thought they had to pass it over there before we could bring it up. I thought you had to actually pass. I haven't heard that the bill's even passed the Senate. So this accusation that we somehow aren't for Border Patrol because we haven't taken up this bill is false, because it hasn't even passed the Senate yet. I heard someone say Mr. Mayorkas has done his job. The last poll I saw was like 85% of Americans think the guy is failing. But yeah, keep singing that song. Rushed, we've been at this for almost a year. One gentleman said no court has actually ruled that Mr. Mayorkas is breaking the law. The Fifth Circuit Court absolutely ruled it. And then the gentleman who mentioned that actually said that the Supreme Court overturned that. No, they didn't. They decided they weren't going to decide. They said, we don't have standing here, or you don't have standing here. So the case wasn't technically even heard. They said, you don't have standing, have a nice day. To suggest that that was overturned, the Fifth Circuit Court's ruling on the lawlessness of this secretary is just wrong. It's wrong. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to push back. I want to tell you that what is happening here is not political theater, as my friends on the other side of the aisle wish to make this. The Democrats have sought to blame Republicans, saying that our inaction has helped cause this border crisis. But I will tell you that nothing is further from the truth. Almost a year ago, this body passed H.R. 2, a border security bill that would fund a record number of Customs and Border Patrol agents, a bill which would give raises to those men and women who are there on the front lines trying to secure our border, a bill which would invest in technology to stop the flow of illegal drugs coming across our borders, a bill which would have restarted wall construction. That bill for almost a year has sat in the other chamber, has sat in the Senate, and Schumer has refused to bring that bill to the floor. This body also passed the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill, giving the Homeland Security Department more money than that department has ever received. We funded those additional agents. We funded those pay raises. We funded additional detention beds. And what has happened to that appropriations bill? It also sits in the Senate, waiting for the Senate to take action. And today, my friends across the aisle, they seek to hide behind this Senate bill that was crafted behind closed doors in the cover of darkness. A bill that did not include any from the House of Representatives, did not include Homeland Security Chairman Mark Green, ranking member from Mississippi, Benny Thompson. The Senate, 3 senators out of 100 got together behind closed doors, and for weeks they sat down and they crafted a bill.
Another minute.
Gentleman's recognized for additional minute.
And that bill, with no input on behalf of the House of Representatives, we are now supposed to adopt that bill before it even passes the Senate. I want to give you a number, Mr. Speaker. That number is 370,000. That is the number of immigrants who came into our country last month alone. That's not a year. That's not 6 months. That is a single month, $370,000. Yet our Homeland Security Secretary continues to maintain that the border is secure. And my friends across the aisle seek to blame Republicans for this crisis. I will tell you that their blame is misplaced. If they want to know the blame and they want to blame someone for what's happening on the southwest border, they need to look in the mirror. They need to look at what their secretary has done, and they need to look at what their president has done. They can no longer blame Republicans for their failures. And I will close with this, Mr. Speaker. If we are unable to hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable for his failures, for his failure to enforce the law,
Gentleman's time has expired.
we can hold no one accountable. Secretary Mayorkas must be impeached.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the administration is enforcing the law. ICE is currently detaining over 38,000 people. This is 4,000 more than Congress has provided funding for. If Republicans want DHS to detain more people, they should provide the funds the administration has asked for in the supplemental request. Under former President Trump, Republicans cheered the doubling of drug seizures. Now they view it as a problem. This is hypocrisy at its finest. Under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, DHS has seized more fentanyl and arrested more criminals for fentanyl-related crimes in the last 2 years than in the previous 5 years. Mr. Speaker, this impeachment has been a pre-planned political stunt from the beginning. I request unanimous consent to include in the record a New York Times article detailing how Secretary of Homeland Security, I request unanimous consent to include in the record a New York Times article detailing how Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mark Green promised donors that the House would impeach Secretary Mayorkas prior to launching any type of inquiry. Get the popcorn, he said.
Without objection. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would yield to myself as much time as I'd consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I think that most of my colleagues here and a lot of people back home certainly know that I had the unbelievable privilege to interview Saddam Hussein on the night of his capture. And as I was sitting there talking to Saddam Hussein, I asked him why he invaded Kuwait, and he gave me all these justifications about who owned which oil field. And then he held up the palm of his hand, and he pointed to the palm of his hand, and he said, you know, all of human civilization comes from the Tigris and Euphrates River. Every person on the planet is an Iraqi, and I'm the president of Iraq. What Saddam was saying is he was the king of the world. The thought struck me, how does a person get there? Well, the old adage came to mind that, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you concentrate power into the hands of fewer and fewer people, you get tyranny every time. In this case, one man. Our founders were brilliant. They were following the philosophies of Montesquieu, and they decided that they would divide power out. They would separate 3 branches of government, and then with the 10th Amendment, they would separate power between the federal government and the states, the local government. But they did develop 3 equal and separate branches of government, with the legislative branch writing the laws and the executive branch executing the laws. And interestingly enough, in the Iran-Contra hearing, the Democrats said in their report, you can't pick and choose which law you want to enforce. It's also fascinating that, you know, here we are. They say it's about policy. This is about a systemic, planned mechanism to undo the immigration laws passed before, just because the current secretary doesn't think that's what they ought to be. That secretary is supposed to execute those laws, but he's chosen not to. It says shall detain criminal felons, and he has directed his DHS employees not to do that. Violating the laws passed by this body, telling this separate but equal branch of government, I don't care what you say.
or have passed as law. I don't care that you represent the voice of the American people. I'm the guy who knows the best way to do it, and I'm going to do it my way. That is the road to tyranny. That is power in one man's hands. And that is not what our Constitution says it's supposed to be. And he took an oath to that Constitution, to defend that Constitution that says this branch writes, that branch executes. He has violated his oath of office. He has subverted the laws that this body has passed and thus basically said, I don't care about the Congress. That is unacceptable. And whether he were a Republican or a Democrat, standing that way, I would be here today doing everything I could to remove him from office. Because when I was 17, I took an oath to that Constitution for the first time. And I served for 24 years willing to take a bullet for that Constitution and the people of this country. And I will not stand idly by while he throws it in the garbage. I reserve.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, even some House Republicans have acknowledged that there's no constitutional basis for impeachment. Representative McClintock called this effort an unconstitutional abuse of power and reckless, partisan, and unserious. Representative Buck said it's not an impeachable offense. This is a policy difference. Mr. Speaker, besides failing to articulate a single cognizable charge that would meet the constitutional impeachment standard of high crimes and misdemeanors, this sham impeachment has been marred by procedural failures. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record documentation of those procedural failures.
Without objection. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and am prepared to close after the gentleman from Mississippi closes.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, the statements from the other side this afternoon have misrepresented the facts and the laws of this baseless sham impeachment. This extreme mega Republican majority is more about stunts rather than solutions. This political stunt is about placating extreme elements within the Republican conference rather than doing what's right for America. Because it's clear that Republicans have failed to make the case for impeachment, they failed to articulate a single high crime and misdemeanor, the other side of the aisle reeks of desperation. Sadly, many Republicans appear willing to undermine the Constitution they claim to hold dear to score cheap political points. I'm holding out hope that some of my colleagues across the aisle will do the right thing, that they will join us in upholding the oath we all swore to the Constitution. I urge my colleagues to reject House Resolution 863. Vote no on this sham impeachment. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time to myself. As you've heard, the evidence against Secretary Mayorkas is compelling, but so too is the constitutional justification for impeachment. The constitutional history and the framers' intent are clear. We, the people's representatives, have no opinion, no option but to exercise this duty when executive branch officials blatantly refuse to comply with the laws we have passed, threaten the separation of powers, imperil the constitutional order, and expose Americans to untold suffering and death. This historical record is unambiguous. From Madison to Hamilton, the framers uniformly believed that executive branch officials who failed to defend the Constitution and enforce the law should no longer hold office. We know that Secretary Mayorkas refused to comply with the law. We know that he lied to Congress and breached the public trust. We all witnessed the horrific consequences. But in closing, my question to my colleagues is this. If Secretary Mayorkas' brazen, blatant disregard for the laws we have passed is not enough to warrant action, why are we even here? What is the point